This is Diabetes Connections with Stacy Sims.
Hello and welcome to Diabetes Connections in the News, a short weekly newscast full of the top diabetes stories and headlines of the past week. I'm Stacy Sims. I'm your host. And whether you are joining me live on Facebook or watching or listening after, I'm really glad you're here. And I am here to get you up to speed quickly. In the News is brought to you by Inside the Breakthrough, a new history of science podcast full of did you know stuff. And now in the news this week, we have a bit of breaking news right now as Medtronic today gets European approval for its Guardian 4 sensor. This is their newest sensor. It requires no finger sticks for calibration or for diabetes treatment decisions. Medtronic says they'll start integrating this sensor into the 780G pump and InPen offerings in the fall. Now, again, this is European approval, the CE mark, as it's called there. There is no word right now on a timeline for U.S. approval for the Guardian 4 sensor. A U.S. FDA advisory committee may give more information and feedback on the first treatment to delay or even prevent type 1 diabetes as early as tomorrow. They'll decide if Teplizumab is safe and effective. And this is not full FDA approval, but it is another step toward releasing what is, it's an IV drug. Basically, it is given as a single 14-day course of infusions. And if you've heard us talk about the TrialNet studies on this on the podcast over the last few years, that's what most of this evidence is coming from. Their studies showed a relative 59% reduction in risk for developing T1D and a delay of diagnosis of 2 to 3 years. Again, the FDA advisory committee is supposed to talk about this on the 27th of May. If you are listening after that, I am putting links in the show notes and in the Facebook comments if you want to kind of circle back and follow up on it. Another new treatment for type 1 diabetes moves into clinical studies. This is a vaccine that looks like it prevents the destruction of insulin-producing cells in the pancreas. And Diabetes Mind has an excellent report on this. We will link that up as well so you could read the whole thing. But the Swedish biotech company Diomed has been working on this immunotherapy vaccine for 2 decades, including a study where they injected it into the lymph nodes of the study participants. Their large-scale phase 3 trials will start this year in Europe and in the U.S., and will include more than 300 children and young adults recently diagnosed with type 1. There is a new long-term study about gestational diabetes. It says that women who are diagnosed with it are more prone to type 2 and type 1 diabetes later in life. Now, it's been known for some time that gestational diabetes is linked to the risk for type 2, but these researchers say autoantibody testing should be considered in order to have a better understanding of all of the risks. In this study, 50% of women who experience gestational diabetes go on to develop type 2 later in life. Almost 6% developed type 1. More info to back up what many patients have been saying for a long time, and that is if an endocrinologist is negative or belittling, people stop listening to them and even stop going for checkups and prescriptions. University of Florida Diabetes Institute polled their minority communities recently, and they found that the main challenge is support from an endo or lack of support. These researchers looked at people who missed 2 or more endocrinology appointments, have experienced diabetes complications in the past year, and received primary care at a federally qualified health center. They found that when people from minority or low-income groups report negative and belittling interactions with their endos, they stop going to appointments. The researchers say this study was to look at implicit bias in care and then hopefully to do something about it. Well, no surprise here, telemedicine skyrocketed for people with type 1 from less than 1% before the COVID-19 pandemic to about 95% at the beginning of it in April of 2020. Now, in March of last year, clinics in the T1D Exchange Quality Improvement Collaboration began attending virtual meetings of their own to talk about best practices, and they collected research from a lot of diabetes visits and from A1C values from a subset of 11 pediatric clinics and 2 adult clinics. And they found that the proportion of telemedicine visits actually varied widely at each clinic. About 62% of clinics performed both video and phone calls. Zoom was the most popular platform. More than 95% of clinics also used CareLink, T-Connect, Clarity, or Gluco to view diabetes data remotely. Now, only 15% of clinics said a psychologist participated in telemedicine. All clinics provided continuous glucose monitor training through telemedicine, and 70% provided insulin pump training. All right, quick break to tell you about one of our fabulous sponsors who helps make Diabetes Connections in the News possible. Inside the Breakthrough, you've heard me talk about this podcast. It is great. It mixes historical wisdom with modern insight. I started subscribing to it. I guess we say follow now. I started following it. Apple is changing things all the time. Back in January is when I started listening to it. And the latest episode talks about when a belief thought to be settled science turns out to be wrong. And to illustrate that point, they talk about the horse poop crisis of New York City. It was real, and it resolved in a way that nobody expected. Listen to Inside the Breakthrough wherever you listen to podcasts. Can a game with competition really help people live a more healthy lifestyle? A one-year trial with people with type 2 diabetes tracks steps and game elements such as points and levels. Some people in this also received social support from a family member or friend, and a third group just got the tracking device. No games and no family support. Everybody in the study lost weight and lowered their A1Cs, but those who didn't play the game took fewer steps and tracked less activity overall. Now, if you've been around for a while in this community, you know a lot of gamified apps have kind of come and gone in the diabetes space. But these researchers say the competitive aspect may be the key. And that is Diabetes Connections in the News. If you like it, please share it. And feel free to send me your news tips, Stacy at diabetes-connections.com. And please join me wherever you get your podcasts for our next episode. We are coming up on Tuesday with an interview with the folks from Banting House. How are they marking 100 years of insulin? We'll be talking to them on Tuesday. I hope you can join me. I'll see you then. Thanks so much.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacy Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.